A woman forgotten by the world and abandoned by the man she loved sits in the back of a silent courtroom. For 20 years, she raised their twin children alone, erased from his glittering life of power and luxury. Today she has been summoned to hear the final will of the man who broke her. His young, glamorous mistress sits in the front row, poised to inherit an empire. But a dusty, 20-year-old document is about to be read, and it holds a secret that will turn this temple of justice into a theater of ruin. The mistress thinks she's won, but she's about to learn that the past never truly dies. And today, it has come for everything. The rain fell in relentless, slanting sheets against the window of their small apartment, blurring the vibrant lights of the city into a watercolor mess. Inside, the silence was heavier than the storm. Mariam clutched a small white stick in her trembling hand, the 2 pink lines, a stark, undeniable confirmation. Pregnant. Not just pregnant, but as the doctor had confirmed that morning, with a mixture of shock and awe with twins. For a moment, pure, unadulterated joy washed over her. She and Geoffrey had been married for 2 years, a whirlwind romance that had felt like a fairy tale. He was brilliant, ambitious, and utterly captivating, a man who seemed destined to conquer the world. They were going to have a family. 2 babies. A boy and a girl, she hoped. She waited for him to come home, the plastic stick wrapped in tissue paper inside her pocket, her heart thrumming with a nervous, happy rhythm. When Geoffrey finally walked in, shaking the rain from his expensive trench coat, his face was a mask of cold resolve she had never seen before. Mariam, he began, not even bothering to kiss her hello. "We need to talk." The joy in her chest turned to ice. He walked over to the small desk by the window, where his briefcase sat. He wasn't looking at her, but at the sprawling city below, a landscape of opportunity he was already claiming as his own. "I've been offered a partnership at the firm," he said, his voice flat. "It's a major step, the kind of opportunity that sets a man up for life. There will be dinners, galas, networking, a certain image to maintain." "Geoffrey, that's wonderful." Mariam started moving towards him. "We should celebrate. And I have some news, too, the most incredible news." "Let me finish." He cut her off, turning to face her. The warmth she had always found in his eyes was gone, replaced by a chillingly pragmatic light. "This life, the one I'm about to step into, requires a certain kind of partner. Someone unencumbered. Someone who can move in the right circles without complications." The word hung in the air between them. Complications. Mariam's hand instinctively went to her still flat stomach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this isn't working." He said, the words clipped and brutal. "This marriage, this life, it was a stepping stone, Mariam. I'm on the main road now, and it's a road I have to walk alone." The room began to spin. She could hear the blood roaring in her ears, a sound that drowned out the drumming of the rain. A stepping stone. "Geoffrey, I'm your wife. I love you. We built this life together. You think this is a life?" He scoffed, gesturing around their modest apartment. "This is a starter kit. I'm moving on to the real thing." Tears streamed down her face as the full, horrifying reality of his words crashed down on her. He was leaving her. Just like that. She pulled the pregnancy test from her pocket, her last desperate card. "But you can't." "Geoffrey, I'm pregnant." He looked at the test, then back at her face, and for a fleeting second, she saw a flicker of something shock, maybe even fear, but it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by that same icy determination. "Then it's even more imperative that we end this now," he said softly. His voice, a venomous caress. That is a complication I simply cannot afford. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a single folded document and a pen. Divorce papers, already prepared. "I'll be generous," he said, as if discussing a business transaction. "I'll give you the apartment and enough to get by for a few months. But you will not use my name, and you will not contact me. Ever. The child or children are your responsibility." He then pulled out another separate document, a single page of dense legal text. "And this," he said, pushing it across the table, "it's a formality. A quitclaim on any future interest in my business ventures. A clean break. My lawyers drafted it. Sign it and you'll get the settlement." He also handed her a sealed envelope. "This is a personal instrument, a parting gift for your trouble." Numb, broken, and utterly defeated, Mariam looked at the man she thought she knew and saw only a stranger. The love of her life was a monster. Through a blur of tears, she scrawled her name where he pointed. She didn't read the words. What was the point? He was erasing her, and he was holding all the power. He took the signed divorce papers, leaving the other document and the sealed envelope on the table. He didn't look back as he picked up his coat. "Goodbye, Mariam," he said, and walked out the door, leaving her alone with the storm, the silence, and the two tiny heartbeats that were now hers, and hers alone. The fairy tale was over. A long, hard road had just begun. Mariam collapsed onto the floor, her sobs lost in the sound of the rain clutching the sealed envelope that felt more like an insult than a gift. The first few years were a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and a constant gnawing fear. Mariam Hart became Mariam Lutfallah, again shedding the name of the man who had discarded her like a piece of trash. The settlement money he'd provided was a pittance, barely enough to last 6 months, let alone raise 2 children. The apartment he'd generously left her was a rental, and the lease was up in a year. She was utterly alone. Her own parents had passed away years before, and Jeffrey had systematically isolated her from her few remaining friends, deeming them not ambitious enough. Staring at her 2 beautiful babies, Owen and Iris, sleeping soundly in their shared crib, Mariam knew that despair was a luxury she couldn't afford. The fire of a mother's love burned away the last of her tears and forged something new in their place, steel. She moved to a small, affordable town 3 states away, a place where no one knew her story. She took on 2, sometimes 3 menial jobs at a time, waitressing cleaning offices, stocking shelves overnight. Every spare dollar was saved. Every waking moment not spent with her children was spent working. The sealed envelope Jeffrey had given her remained unopened, tucked away in a box of old photographs. She couldn't bear to look at it, viewing it as the final patronizing insult from a man she now despised. When Owen and Iris started school, Mariam used the precious hours of the day to study. She enrolled in online community college courses, first in business management, then in culinary arts, channeling her passion for baking into a tangible skill. The late nights were no longer filled with worry, but with textbooks and flour-dusted hands. She started small, selling cakes and pastries from her tiny kitchen to local cafes. Her reputation grew. People loved her creations, not just for their taste, but for the heart she poured into them. Within 5 years, she had saved enough for a down payment on a small, run-down storefront on Main Street. She named it the Twin Loaf. The bakery became the heart of the community. Mariam was there before sunrise, her hands skillfully kneading dough, and she was there long after sunset, balancing the books. Owen and Iris grew up in that bakery. They did their homework at a small table in the corner, the air filled with the scent of cinnamon and melting chocolate. They learned the value of hard work, not from lectures, but from watching their mother build an empire from nothing. 20 years passed. The tiny storefront expanded into the adjacent building. The Twin Loaf became a beloved regional brand with 2 more locations in neighboring towns. Mariam was no longer the broken woman Jeffrey had left behind. She was a respected business owner, a pillar of her community, and a proud, loving mother. Owen was studying law at the State University, a quiet, intense young man with his mother's sense of justice. Iris was a budding artist, a free spirit with a fierce loyalty to her family, attending a prestigious art school on a scholarship. They knew the truth about their father, not a sugar-coated version, but the raw, painful story of his abandonment. It had not made them bitter, but had instead bound the 3 of them into an unbreakable unit. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Mariam was boxing up a custom wedding cake, a man in a sharp suit walked into the bakery. He looked starkly out of place amongst the cozy decor and sweet aromas. "Are you Miss Mariam Lutfallah?" he asked, his tone formal. "I am," Mariam said, wiping her hands on her apron. The man handed her a crisp, legal-sized envelope. "You've been served," he said, and turned and walked out, without another word. With trembling fingers, Mariam opened the envelope. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she read the legal jargon. It was a summons, a formal notice to attend the probate court reading of the last will and testament of one Jeffrey Hart. He had died suddenly, a massive heart attack at the age of 48. The room seemed to tilt. After 20 years of absolute silence, 20 years of being a ghost, he had pulled her back into his world. A cold dread mixed with a surge of old anger washed over her. His mistress, a woman named Beatrice Croft, who was often splashed across society magazines, was petitioning to be named the sole executor of his vast estate. The summons was a legal formality, notifying any and all potential heirs. She almost threw the letter away. What could he possibly have to say to her now? What sick game was he playing from beyond the grave? But that night, as she looked at her children, now young adults on the cusp of their own lives, she knew she had to go. Not for herself, not for any hope of money, but for them. For the 2 children he had never met, never acknowledged, never loved. This was the final chapter of a story he had started 2 decades ago, and she would be there to see it end. The summons sat on Mariam's kitchen counter for 3 days, a white rectangle of dread in her otherwise orderly life. She hadn't told the twins yet. How could she? How could she explain that the ghost who had haunted their lives was now demanding her presence? Her first instinct was to ignore it, to throw it in the fire and pretend it never arrived. Jeffrey's world of cutthroat business, high-stakes finance, and tabloid fodder relationships was a universe away from her warm bakery and the quiet life she had so painstakingly built. She wanted no part of it. But the name of the law firm on the letterhead Dawson, Finch and Gable stirred a faint memory. It wasn't the firm Jeffrey had been a part of when he left her. It was an older, more established name. Driven by a curiosity she couldn't quell, she looked them up. The firm was ancient, one of the oldest in the city, known for handling old money and complex family trusts. It seemed an odd choice for a modern corporate raider like Jeffrey. Just as she was about to close the laptop, her phone rang. It was an unlisted number. Miss Lutfallah, a gravelly voice, inquired. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Howard Davies. I'm a senior partner at Dawson, Finch and Gable. I trust you received our correspondence regarding the estate of Mr. Jeffrey Hart." Mariam's spine stiffened. "I did. And with all due respect, Mr. Davies, I have no interest in Mr. Hart's estate. His world has nothing to do with mine." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Miss Lutfallah?" "Mariam. I knew your father. I was a junior associate when he sought counsel from my firm many years ago. He was a brilliant man, an innovator. This was unexpected. Her father, an engineering professor, had passed away a year before she even met Geoffrey. He had been a gentle academic soul who tinkered endlessly in his garage. My father, Mariam, asked, confused. Yes, which is why I am personally urging you to attend the reading. I understand your reluctance, believe me. I have followed Mr. Hart's career over the years. But I must impress upon you that your presence is not merely a formality. It is essential. His voice was imbued with a strange urgency. Before Mariam could question him further, another call beeped through. She glanced at the screen. It was a number from the city. On a gut feeling, she put Mr. Davies on hold. "Hello, is this Mariam Lutfallah?" The voice was sharp, polished, and dripping with disdain. It was a voice accustomed to getting what it wanted. "It is." "This is Beatrice Croft," the woman announced, as if Mariam should be honored. "I'm sure you know who I am. I'm calling about this ridiculous legal notice you were sent. Let me be perfectly clear. You are not welcome. Geoffrey's past is dead, and so are you as far as his life was concerned. Whatever pathetic attempt this is to get money, it won't work. The estate is mine. Stay away, or I will have my lawyers bury you in litigation you can't possibly afford. Do you understand me, little Baker?" The sheer audacity, the venomous condescension, sent a hot flash of anger through Mariam. The fear and confusion she'd been feeling were burned away by pure, cold rage. The little Baker had survived 20 years without a damn thing from Geoffrey Hart. She had built a life, a business and a family with her own 2 hands. "Thank you for your call, Ms. Croft," Mariam said, her voice dangerously calm. "Your concern has been noted. I will see you in court." She hung up before Beatrice could respond and switched back to the other line. "Mr. Davies, I've changed my mind. Tell me when and where." That evening she sat Owen and Iris down at the familiar kitchen table, the scent of cooling bread still hanging in the air. She laid the summons out between them and explained everything, the news of Geoffrey's death. The summons, the strange call from the old lawyer, and the threatening call from his mistress. Owen's face hardened, his jaw set in a protective line that reminded her so much of her own father. "She threatened you, after everything he did." Iris, ever the more emotional of the two, reached across the table and took Mariam's hand. "Mum, you don't have to do this. We don't need anything from him. We have you. That's all that's ever mattered." "I know, sweetie," Mariam said, squeezing her hand. "And I'm not going for money. I'm going because for 20 years he pretended you didn't exist. He tried to erase us. And that woman, his partner, thinks she has the right to threaten me, to call me a nobody. She looked at her 2 incredible children, the living, breathing proof of a love Geoffrey had tried to discard. He doesn't get the final word. We do. We are going to walk into that courtroom, and we are going to show them what he threw away. We will do it with dignity and strength. We will do it for us." A silent understanding passed between them. This wasn't about an inheritance. It was about closing a painful chapter on their own terms. It was about standing up together as a family. Mariam went to her bedroom and pulled out an old, dusty box from the back of her closet. Inside, beneath faded photos of her parents, was the sealed envelope Geoffrey had given her all those years ago. For the first time, she felt no pain looking at it, only a cold resolve. She took the envelope and the other legal document he'd left her and placed them in her handbag. Whatever they were part of the story. And she was finally ready to hear the end of it. The drive to the city was a journey back in time. As the familiar skyline rose to meet them, a knot of anxiety tightened in Mariam's stomach. This was Geoffrey's city, a concrete and glass monument to the ambition that had consumed him. Every towering building seemed to sneer down at them, a reminder of the world she had been exiled from. Owen drove his hand steady on the wheel, his expression unreadable. Iris sat in the back, sketching furiously in her notepad, channeling her nervous energy onto the page. Mariam looked at her children, now 20 years old. They were adults, strong and compassionate, the two best parts of her life. They were her victory. Whatever happened today, she had already won. They had booked a room in a modest hotel, a stark contrast to the five-star opulence Geoffrey had undoubtedly favoured. Mariam had insisted on paying for everything herself. She would not accept a single thing from his estate, not even a court-mandated travel stipend. She chose her outfit with care, a simple, well-tailored navy blue dress, elegant but understated. It was the uniform of a woman who was confident, successful, and owed nothing to anyone. Owen wore a dark suit, looking more like a young lawyer than a student, and Iris wore a gracefully simple black dress, her artistic flair showing only in a unique silver necklace she had designed herself. They were the Lutfalas, a united front. The probate court was housed in a formidable old building of granite and marble. Its grand echoing halls were designed to intimidate, to make the individual feel small and insignificant. As they walked towards the designated courtroom, they felt the shift in atmosphere. The air grew thick with the scent of expensive perfume, leather, and entitlement. Whispers followed them down the corridor. "Who are they? I didn't know Geoffrey had other relatives." And then they saw her. Beatrice Croft stood at the centre of a small, sycophantic crowd, holding court like a queen. She was exactly as she appeared in the magazines, tall, impossibly thin, draped in designer clothes, and dripping with diamonds that flashed cruelly under the courthouse lights. Her face, a masterpiece of cosmetic subtlety, registered a flash of surprise, then hardened into a mask of pure contempt as she saw Mariam and the twins. She deliberately turned her back on them, a clear and public dismissal. The message was obvious. You do not belong here. Mariam felt a tremor of her old insecurity, the feeling of being the girl from the wrong side of the tracks. But then she felt Owen's hand on her arm, a steady grounding pressure. She looked up and met his gaze, and saw her own strength reflected back at her. They took their seats at the back of the courtroom, a small island in a sea of pinstripes and silk. The room was packed. On one side sat Geoffrey's corporate cronies, men with predatory smiles and cold eyes. On the other sat Beatrice's friends, society women, who looked at Mariam and her children as if they were an unpleasant smell. At the front, Beatrice sat next to a sleek, expensive-looking lawyer. She leaned over and whispered something to him, and he glanced back at Mariam's family, a smirk playing on his lips. An elderly man with kind eyes and a slightly stooped posture approached them. "Mrs. Lutfalla?" he asked softly. It was Howard Davies. "Yes," Mariam replied, shaking his offered hand. "I'm so glad you came," he said, his gaze flicking briefly to Owen and Iris with an expression of deep sympathy. "Please don't let this atmosphere intimidate you. Just listen. That's all you need to do." He gave her a small, reassuring nod before retreating to a seat on the other side of the aisle. The door to the judge's chambers opened, and a bailiff called out, "All rise." An imposing judge with a mane of white hair entered and took his seat, the Honourable Judge Albright presiding. "Be seated." The room fell silent. Judge Albright looked over the documents before him, his expression stern. "We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Geoffrey Hart. I am aware this is a high-profile estate, and emotions may run high. I will tolerate no outbursts. Is that understood?" A murmur of assent went through the room. Beatrice sat a little straighter, a smug, proprietary smile on her face. This was her coronation. Mariam took a deep breath, her heart pounding a steady, defiant rhythm. She was ready. The ghosts of the past were all gathered in this room, and it was time to face them. Judge Albright adjusted his spectacles and picked up the thick, professionally bound document that represented the sum of Jeffrey Hart's life. The air in the courtroom was electric with anticipation. For the corporate sharks, it was about the fate of a multi-billion-dollar empire. For Beatrice Croft, it was about the validation of her entire existence. For Mariam, it was about an ending. This document, the judge began, his voice booming in the silent room, is the last will and testament of Jeffrey Hart, dated March 12th of this year. It has been verified and is legally binding. Beatrice preened. The date was recent, well into her reign as Jeffrey's partner. She shot a triumphant glance over her shoulder towards the back of the room, a silent, final sneer at Mariam. The judge started with the usual bequests: a sizable donation to his alma mater, several $1 million to a prominent arts foundation, whose board members seated in the front row nodded in grim satisfaction. There were smaller, yet still substantial cash gifts to his executive board and personal staff. With each name read, another vulture was satisfied, and the tension surrounding the primary inheritance grew. Beatrice's lawyer patted her hand reassuringly. This was all standard procedure. The trivialities before the main event. Now Judge Albright continued turning a page. We come to the matter of personal effects and properties. He read a list that was staggering in its opulence. A villa in Tuscany, a penthouse apartment on Park Avenue, a collection of rare sports cars, a yacht moored in Monaco. As expected, each item was bequeathed to my beloved partner, Ms. Beatrice Croft. With every word, Beatrice's smile widened. Her friends behind her exchanged knowing looks. It was all going according to plan. She was now officially one of the wealthiest women in the country. Mariam watched her, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. She felt no jealousy, only a clinical curiosity. This woman had built her life on the foundations of Mariam's pain, and she was so blissfully, arrogantly unaware of the cracks beneath her feet. Owen sat beside her, rigid with a quiet fury. Iris had stopped sketching and was watching Beatrice with an artist's intense, analytical gaze, as if committing this portrait of avarice to memory. Finally, Judge Albright announced, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly. We address the disposition of Mr. Hart's primary asset, his controlling interest in Hart Industries and its subsidiary holdings. This was the moment. The entire room held its breath. Hart Industries was a titan, a sprawling global conglomerate worth billions. This was the grand prize. Beatrice leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. The judge cleared his throat. The will states, to my partner Beatrice Croft, I leave my remaining 10% ownership stake in Hart Industries, along with all associated dividends and voting rights. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. 10%, Beatrice's face fell. The triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a mask of stunned disbelief. She turned to her lawyer, her eyes wide with panic. 10%! That's impossible, it's a mistake, she hissed, her voice, a piercing whisper that carried through the silent room. Her lawyer looked just as baffled. It must be a clerical error, he whispered back, frantically flipping through his own copy of the documents. Judge Albright looked up, his gaze stern. Ms. Croft, I warned you about outbursts. He then looked back down at the will. There is no error. The will is quite specific. 10%. He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. Which brings us to the remainder of the estate. The judge set aside the main will and picked up a different file. It was older, its edges slightly yellowed. The disposition of the other 90% of Hart Industries is not governed by this will. Instead, it is subject to a pre-existing, irrevocable legal instrument, a private trust and ownership agreement that predates the founding of the company itself. The corporate lawyers began murmuring to each other, their faces etched with confusion. A pre-existing agreement? What were they talking about? Geoffrey had always presented himself as the sole founder, the singular genius behind the empire. Beatrice was pale, her knuckles white as she gripped the table. What agreement? I was his partner for 8 years. He told me everything. There is no other agreement. Judge Albright ignored her, his eyes scanning the old document. This court was petitioned to unseal and enforce this instrument upon Mr. Hart's death. It is a founding charter for a holding company named LP Innovations. He looked up at the bewildered faces in the courtroom. According to this document, LP Innovations was the original entity that held the patents and seed capital for the technology that would eventually become Hart Industries. Mr. Hart was appointed managing director, entitled to a generous salary and a 10% stake for his managerial role. The remaining 90%, the controlling interest, was to be held in trust for the sole primary owner of LP Innovations. The judge paused, his gaze sweeping across the room before landing with deliberate, profound weight on the woman sitting quietly in the back row. He looked directly at Mariam, a woman he had a binding fiduciary duty to, the founder and majority shareholder, Ms. Mariam Lutfalla. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with a low hum of anticipation, fell into a profound and sudden silence. Judge Albright's words, "To my partner Beatrice Croft, I leave my remaining 10% ownership stake," seemed to hang in the air, refusing to dissipate, a collective auditory hallucination that no one could quite process. Beatrice's mind went blank. The triumphant smile on her face didn't so much fall as it froze a grotesque mask of joy that no longer matched the script. Her brain frantically tried to rearrange the words into a sentence that made sense. 100%, he must have said. Or maybe 10% is to be given to charity, and the rest? 10%. Her voice, meant to be a sharp whisper to her lawyer, came out as a strangled croak that echoed in the unnatural quiet. That's impossible. It's a mistake. Her lawyer, a man known for his unflappable demeanor, looked as though he'd been struck. He fumbled with his copy of the will, his face paling as he scanned the text. He could find no error. The ink was clear, the language precise. A ripple of shock and confusion spread through the room. The corporate sharks exchanged baffled, calculating glances. Was there a secret heir? A hostile takeover from beyond the grave? Geoffrey Hart had been a man of absolute control. This felt like a baffling, uncharacteristic lapse. Judge Albright looked up from the will, his gaze sweeping over the room, cold and authoritative. "Miss Croft, I warned you about outbursts." He then set the thick, modern document aside with an air of finality. "There is no mistake in the will, it is quite specific." He then reached for a different file, one that had been sitting separately on his bench. It was an older, thinner folder, its edges yellowed with age, held together by a simple string tie. The contrast was stark. One was the legacy Geoffrey had publicly crafted, the other a secret he had buried. This, the judge announced, his tone, shifting, becoming heavier with historical weight, is because the disposition of the other 90% of Hart Industries is not and has never been governed by Mr. Hart's personal will. Instead, it is subject to a pre-existing, irrevocable legal instrument, a private trust and ownership agreement that predates the founding of Hart Industries itself. Mariam felt a strange jolt, a flicker of something deep in her memory. At the back of the courtroom, she sat perfectly still, a statue in a sea of turmoil. While Beatrice was panicking, Mariam was simply trying to breathe. The judge untied the string on the old folder with deliberate care. This court was petitioned by the trustees, the firm of Dawson, Finch and Gable, to unseal and enforce this instrument upon Mr. Hart's death. It is the founding charter for a holding company established 21 years ago. The company was named LP Innovations. LP. The initials hung in the air, and for Mariam they were a key, turning a lock deep within her mind. A torrent of fragmented memories dormant for 2 decades began to rush forward. Her father in his garage workshop, the scent of solder and ozone in the air, his face alight with the joy of discovery. He was holding up a circuit board, explaining with breathless excitement the revolutionary data compression algorithm he had perfected. "It'll change everything, Mariam," he'd said. "The way we store and send information." Another memory her father, weeks later, spreading legal papers across their kitchen table. "A patent application. You sign here as a co-owner," he'd insisted. "You are my inspiration, honey. And besides, we must always keep it in the family. LP Innovations, Mariam Lutfallah Innovations." Her own name entwined with her father's legacy. According to this document, the judge's voice cut through her reverie, pulling her back to the charged courtroom LP. Innovations was the original entity that held the patents and seed capital for the technology that would eventually become the bedrock of Hart Industries. Mr. Jeffrey Hart, a promising young executive at the time, was appointed managing director of this holding company. Beatrice was on her feet now, her lawyer's restraining hand brushed aside. What agreement? "What are you talking about? Jeffrey was the founder. It was his genius. His vision." Judge Albright didn't even look at her. He continued as if she hadn't spoken. Mr. Hart was empowered to leverage this intellectual property to found a new corporation. In exchange for his managerial expertise and lifelong stewardship, he was granted a generous salary and a 10% stake in the venture. The remaining 90%, the controlling interest of everything that followed, was to be held in trust for the sole primary owner of LP Innovations. The room was utterly silent now, every person leaning forward caught in the inexorable pull of the judge's narrative. This wasn't just a will reading. It was an exhumation. Mariam's heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic, wild drumbeat. She could feel Owen's hand finding hers, his grip tight and grounding. Iris on her other side was frozen, her artist's eyes wide, taking in every flicker of emotion, every nuance of the unfolding drama. Judge Albright paused, looking up from the ancient document. His gaze swept past the stunned faces of the board members, past the gaping mouth of Beatrice's lawyer, past Beatrice herself, who now stood trembling, a statue of rage and confusion. His eyes traversed the entire length of the courtroom until they landed with deliberate, profound weight on the forgotten woman sitting quietly in the back row. He looked directly at Mariam, a woman to whom Mr. Hart had a binding, lifelong fiduciary duty. The founder beneficiary and 90% majority shareholder, Miss Mariam Lutfallah. For a single suspended moment, the world stopped. The name, her name, echoed in the marble hall, imbued with a power she had never known. Then from the front of the room came the sound. It started as a choked gasp, and then tore its way out of Beatrice's throat, a raw, guttural shriek of pure animalistic denial. No, the scream shattered the courtroom's decorum. It was the sound of a universe collapsing. "That's a lie, a forgery!" she shrieked, her body trembling violently. She pointed a shaking diamond-clad finger at Mariam, her face a contorted mask of disbelief and hate. Her he left me for a reason, because she was nothing, a small-town baker. He built it all. It was his work, his struggle. It is mine. Judge Albright slammed his gavel down the sharp crack like a gunshot. "Miss Croft, I will have you held in contempt." But it was too late. The room had descended into chaos. In the midst of the pandemonium, Mariam's mind, strangely clear, was performing a final horrifying calculation. Her hands, moving with a will of their own, reached into her handbag. Her fingers brushed against the 2 pieces of paper she had carried for 20 years. The sealed envelope felt heavy, a repository of old pain. With trembling fingers she tore it open. Inside was not a letter, but a single ornately printed stock certificate. It was for 900 shares of a company called LP Innovations. Tucked behind it was a small folded note written in Geoffrey's arrogant slanted script. She unfolded it. "Consider this severance. I doubt you're smart enough to ever figure out what it's worth." The breath left her body in a painful rush. The sheer, breathtaking cruelty of it. The arrogance. He hadn't just discarded her. He had mocked her, dangling the keys to his entire kingdom in front of her face, confident she would see it as nothing more than a worthless piece of paper, a final insult. Her shaking fingers went to the other document, the one he'd slid across the table in that rain-lashed apartment, the one she had signed through a blur of tears. It wasn't a quitclaim. The heading, which she had never bothered to read, was clear: Trust and Management Agreement. Her signature wasn't a relinquishment, it was an appointment. She had formally legally named Geoffrey Hart as the manager of her own company. The elderly lawyer, Howard Davies, materialized by her side, his presence a calm anchor in the storm. He spoke softly, his voice for her alone. "Your father was a brilliant man, Miss Lutfaller. But he was cautious. He saw Geoffrey's ambition and didn't fully trust it. He had my firm draft this agreement to protect his legacy and to protect you." Geoffrey signed it, desperate to get his hands on the patents. His hubris was in believing you would never uncover its true nature. Mariam looked up from the damning revelatory papers in her hands. She saw Beatrice finally collapsing into her chair, her body racked with hysterical silent sobs, as her lawyer tried to console her. She saw the corporate board members in a frantic huddle, their faces ashen. She saw the empire Geoffrey had built, not as his monument, but as a house he had constructed in her front yard, all while telling her she was homeless. Geoffrey hadn't left her a fortune. He had left her a reckoning, and it was now and had always been hers to command. The moment Judge Albright's gavel fell, for the final time the courtroom's dam of forced civility broke. A tsunami of noise crashed over them, as reporters who had been lurking in the gallery surged forward. Flashbulbs strobed like lightning, turning the scene into a series of stark, bleached-out photographs. Shouted questions became an incoherent roar. Mariam instinctively moved to shield Owen and Iris, her arms forming a protective barrier as Mr. Davies guided them through the scrum toward a private exit. They caught a final searing image of Beatrice Croft, slumped in her chair, a hollowed-out porcelain doll, abandoned in the wreckage of her own life. The storm followed them. News vans camped outside their hotel, their satellite dishes aimed like weapons. Mariam's face, a name nobody knew that morning, was now splashed across every news channel and website. The headlines were a frenzy of hyperbole. The Baker billionaire. Hart's hidden heir mistress gets her just desserts. Back in the quiet anonymity of their hotel room, the sheer unreality of the day descended. For a long moment, the three of them just stood there, the city's muffled roar, a distant soundtrack to their silent shock. Iris was the first to move, sinking onto the edge of a bed and letting out a long, shuddering breath. Owen stood by the window, his back to the room, his shoulders rigid as he stared down at the sprawling city that was now impossibly theirs. Mariam looked at her children, the two anchors of her life. "Are you two okay?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. Owen turned his eyes, burning with a fierce, protective light. "Are we okay, Mum? Are you, for 20 years, you carried this? You built everything for us from nothing while he was playing king on a stolen throne." The anger in his voice was not for the lost years of luxury, but for the years of struggle his mother had endured alone. Iris pulled out her sketchbook, her hands moving with a frantic energy. "I keep seeing it," she murmured, not looking up. "That woman's face when the judge said your name. It wasn't just shock, it was evaporation. Like she realized she was a ghost all along. She looked up at Mariam, her eyes wide with a dawning awe. "He never beat you, Mum. Even when we had nothing, he never truly beat you." In that small generic hotel room, surrounded by the family she had forged in the fires of abandonment, Mariam felt the last tremors of shock give way to a profound, unshakable calm. This wasn't a lottery she had won. It was a reckoning. It was the universe finally balancing its books. She walked over to Owen and placed a hand on his arm. "He didn't beat us because our foundation was real," she said, her voice imbued with a new, quiet authority. "It was built on love and hard work. His was built on a lie, and lies, no matter how grand, eventually collapse." That night she didn't sleep. She sat with the lights off, watching the city glitter, not with avarice, but with a sense of immense, sobering responsibility. This empire built on her father's genius and stained by Jeffrey's greed was now her burden and her opportunity. She wasn't thinking about the money. She was thinking about the thousands of employees, the company's impact on the world, and the name her father had left in her care. Her first call the next morning was to Howard Davies. Her instructions were clear and precise. She wasn't an avenging angel, but a business owner. She called an emergency board meeting for the following week. Walking into the Hart Industries boardroom was like stepping into the heart of Jeffrey's ambition. The long, imposing table was carved from a single piece of mahogany. The chairs were black leather thrones. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed a panoramic view of the city, a conquered territory, laid at the feet of its master. The air was thick with the scent of power, masculine and suffocating. The remaining board members, men with cold eyes and predatory smiles, were already seated. They watched her walk in their expressions, a calculated blend of apprehension and condescension. They were sizing her up, expecting a grieving widow or a startled baker they could easily manipulate. They did not expect Mariam Lutfalla. She entered flanked by Owen and Mr. Davies, and their presence alone shifted the room's dynamics. She didn't take the seat at the head of the table, Jeffrey's seat. She chose a chair at the side, a deliberate move that declared the old hierarchy was dead. "Good morning, gentlemen," she began, her voice resonating with a clarity that commanded attention. The nervous tremor she'd feared was absent, replaced by the steady tone of a woman who had faced far worse than a room full of arrogant men. "I imagine you have many questions. Let me be direct. For the last 20 years, I have been building a business from the ground up. I know what it means to meet a payroll, to manage inventory, to satisfy customers, and to create something of value with my own two hands. I am not a stranger to the world of business. I am simply a stranger to this kind of business." She paused, letting her words sink in her gaze, meeting each man's. "I am not here to destroy Hart Industries. I am here to reclaim its soul." A palpable tension filled the room. This was not the speech they had anticipated. There will be a full transparent audit of all company finances, effective immediately. The aggressive slash-and-burn practices that this company has become known for will end. Our focus will no longer be solely on the next quarter's profits, but on long-term sustainable growth, on employee welfare, on ethical innovation. We will become a company that builds, not just acquires, that creates, not just consumes. She stood, her small frame commanding the space. You have a choice, she concluded, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. You can embrace this new direction and help me build a company our children would be proud of. Or you can tender your resignation this afternoon. There is no third option. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of Geoffrey Hart's entire philosophy being dismantled in less than 5 minutes. In the weeks that followed, the karma of Geoffrey's life continued its relentless course. As Mariam worked with Mr. Davies to clean the house he'd left behind, the true state of Beatrice Croft's inheritance became painfully public. Geoffrey's personal debts were staggering. His 10% stake was devoured by creditors before she saw a dime. A tabloid photo captured her moving out of the Park Avenue penthouse, the doormen who once bowed to her, now impassively carrying boxes to a simple moving van. Her society friends, who had flocked to her light when it was bright, scattered like insects, whispering that they'd always known there was something fragile about her position. She had been a queen in a rented kingdom, and her lease was up. Months later, Mariam was working in her new office. She had refused Geoffrey's opulent suite, choosing a smaller, brighter space. On the wall hung one of Iris's abstract paintings, a swirl of defiant colour. On her desk sat a photo of the twins laughing outside, the twin loaf. It was a room that belonged to her. Her assistant buzzed. Miss Lutfalla, there's a Miss Croft here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment. Send her in. Mariam said, her heart steady. Beatrice was a spectre of her former self. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple, ill-fitting dress. Her face was pale and drawn, the arrogant fire in her eyes extinguished, leaving behind only the hollowed-out shell of her pride. I just wanted to see you, Beatrice stammered, her voice thin. She looked around the modest office, as if searching for an answer. To understand. Why are you doing all this? You could have just taken the money and lived on an island for the rest of your life. Why are you here in this office running all of this? Mariam leaned back in her chair, regarding the woman who had once held her in such contempt. She felt no triumph, no desire to gloat. She only felt a vast, weary pity. Because it was never about the money, Beatrice, Mariam said softly. 20 years ago, the man you loved tried to erase me. He took my father's work, his legacy, and twisted it into this monument to his own ego, all while pretending my children and I didn't exist. He thought I was nothing. You thought I was nothing. Mariam rose and walked to the window, looking down not at a conquered territory, but at a city full of lives her company now touched. This, she said, her gesture encompassing everything, is not about revenge. Revenge is a fire that burns out, leaving only ash. This is about legacy. I am building something that will last, something that my children, Owen and Iris, can be proud to inherit one day. Something built on integrity, not on lies. Beatrice stared, the simple, devastating truth of Mariam's words finally landing. She had built her life on a man's affection, which had proven as worthless as his promises. Mariam had built her life on herself. There was nothing more to say. Beatrice turned and walked out of the office, not just defeated, but irrelevant. Mariam didn't watch her go. Her gaze was already on the future. On her desk were the preliminary charters for a charitable foundation in her father's name, which Owen was helping her draft. Next to them were Iris's first sketches for a new company logo, a stylized image of 2 intertwined saplings growing into a strong tree. She was not just cleaning a house, she was planting a garden in its place. Her revenge wasn't a single fiery act in a courtroom. It was in the quiet, daily determined work of building a better world than the one Geoffrey had left behind. And so Mariam's story isn't just about the shocking moment a will is read. It's about the quiet strength cultivated over 2 decades of struggle and sacrifice. It's a powerful reminder that true wealth isn't measured in stock portfolios or lavish assets, but in integrity, love, and the resilience to rebuild a life from the ashes. Beatrice's scream in the courtroom was the sound of a hollow dream shattering, while Mariam's quiet victory was the culmination of a life lived with purpose and dignity. Her ultimate revenge wasn't in taking Geoffrey's empire, but in transforming it into something he could never have imagined, a force for good. If this story of justice and empowerment resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that strength and perseverance will always win. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more incredible stories of karma and redemption. What did you think of Mariam's final decision? Let us know in the comments below.